Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by a returning guest, local sheriff, and we have had him on the show, and it's back in the archives, episode 44, but it is a must listen. But without further ado, welcome Sheriff Derek Sanders.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you making and carving out some time in your busy schedule. You're only the sheriff and trying to do so many things, including driving around doing actual policing, which I think many of us are familiar from social media and looking at press releases and such.
Yeah, I try to stay pretty busy. It's definitely still the fun part of the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are revisiting since, let's see, our episode, we were just chatting about it. The episode aired September of 2023. You came into office and role and rank in the beginning of the year 2023. So now we are still kind of in the first quarter. We're recording in March of 25. But yeah, I'm excited to revisit some things. You are a very innovative, high drive leader that is resonating with a lot of folks. You make some fans, you make some not so much fans, but I think what we can all agree on is you're doing things in this very overt way. And so I'm very excited to highlight you and kind of be able to pick your brain on behalf of so many of us that are watching from local or farther away.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share we've had successes, we've had failures. But the one thing about transparency is that you've kind of got to show both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think where a lot of agencies get in trouble is that the transparency only extends as far as the good stuff, the things that shine a positive light. But if there's one thing that I think I have proven over the last 2 years, it's that you can actually find success in the failures as well. You can actually find success in how you handle misconduct, how you handle your own failures. I've had some of those. I've dealt with them very publicly. And I think that there's some honor in that. And, we can't always escape with a perfect record, but I think we can probably escape this profession with our honor.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely honor in that. I think that, a lot of folks put it well, a lot of really strong leaders, through history or contemporary leaders. And it really goes to that, hey, here's my mistake, here's the postmortem or the debrief, and not just like the casual, easy surface layer debrief of, yeah, here's some things that went well, here's some things that went like okay or not so well, and yeah, move on to the next one. But really taking on that ownership, right? Really just putting it all out there, surrendering the ego so we can get better, so our teams can get better and people can learn from our mistakes, which is a lot of what this whole project is.
Absolutely. And, it's funny, when I was campaigning, I spent a lot of time in the car driving to different locations and doorbelling and those kinds of things. And I finished a couple different Jocko audiobooks, but one of them was Extreme Ownership. And that one stuck the most with me because I'm like, this is what we look for in our deputies. This is what we look for in corrections. This is what we look for in support staff, dispatch, command staff. It's the extreme ownership, right? It's understanding that teams fail and succeed together and that everyone has to have extreme ownership in their own roles.
Yeah. And there's no better way to build that than to demonstrate it. I mean, you are the top dog, as it were. So people are watching and people are, and even for the leaders that are not the strong leaders, like it has a trickle down effect. And I don't think anyone would really argue with that because we all have had in some point in our lives, hopefully not currently for those of you listening, but we've all had some better and worse bosses. I don't think anyone would dispute that and recognize that there's so much we can learn from both.
Yep, absolutely. A lot of my experiences have been drawn from what I don't want to be.
Yeah.
And that's both personal and professional. Childhood, I saw a lot of what I don't want to ever experience, what I don't want to bestow upon, my kids, those kind of things. And professionally, it was, wow, like that's not how I'm going to lead if I ever get a chance to lead one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's cut back to transparency. So that is something that I've noticed in talking with a lot of peers and colleagues from the region, and you do put a lot out there. A lot of it is the real talk of, hey, here's a dangerous person that did this, and here's how we answered it. Here's how we responded to that. And it's not common. It's not common nationally or locally. The other flip is transparency on something like IAs. Now, do you have a guiding kind of mindset as far as like how you share, how much you share, and how you communicate that internally as well?
Um, well, the first one is the good stuff, right? So you've got the good stuff that I think everyone wants to share. And give me just 1 second here because I'm actually pulling up an RCW that's kind of guided me.
Yeah, absolutely.
The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies that serve them.
Hmm.
And so this is actually from the RCW. It's under the construction of the public records piece. And it's under our RCW, and I want to pull it up because it's really important, I think, for people to understand that this is actually in our RCW when it comes to disclosing things. And I'll read it to you because I actually think it's probably one of the more profound quotes within our RCW. It says, "The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies that serve them. The people, in delegating authority, do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so they may maintain control over the instruments they have created." So that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Because, it's really easy to get caught up in like all we do is good stuff. But if you've worked in a police station for one day, there's bad things that occur too.
Absolutely.
And so what I really try to focus on, and it's a tough balance sometimes, but where I try to place myself is as a citizen, would this be something I'd be interested in knowing? So like a deputy gets an offender bender.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really like a serious case of public information need to know? Well, I mean, maybe if they're intoxicated or, something crazy was occurring. But generally speaking, I would say no. Those wouldn't fall under misconduct. People make mistakes. There's other things, right? Stealing, sexual harassment, all those kinds of stuff. Getting a DUI, committing a crime. I think those are significant items of public information. The public wants to know what their local police are up to, both on and off duty, because we're supposed to set the standard. So the stuff that's good to show, that's a no-brainer. We probably don't need to focus much time on that because a lot of agencies here do show a lot of really good stuff on social media. It's the stuff that is embarrassing, that isn't super fun, that we don't want to acknowledge happened. The ones that really don't feel good, like really don't feel good down to my core, those are the ones that I share. I leave out names, right? I leave out names for everything we do on social media. So we don't name defendants. We don't name victims. We don't name. The only exception is if we have a suspect on the run that we put on a bolo for, like an official bolo. But when we're disclosing body cam footage and stuff, we don't put names because it doesn't serve an actual valid purpose 99% of the time. And we do the same thing for employee misconduct. We don't need to have them doxxed and have people showing up at their house and whatnot. But I do think that when people place a significant amount of trust in their public officials and they abandon that trust, that they should have a right to know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've covered it so many times on this show and so many others out there, putting out their information, whether it's podcasts or articles or what have you, or just in their day to day with the troops that they work with. But we literally put out our blood, sweat, and tears in the commission of this job to serve the public. And when someone should tarnish that, and I get there's mistakes, I've made plenty of them, right? And I will continue to make mistakes. But when there's egregious mistakes, violations of public trust, like we can't we can't stand for it, and we certainly can't hide it. And you do see examples of that nationally in the headlines, which is extremely unfortunate and something that we talk about here as well.
Yeah, I agree. And like the thing is, it's embarrassing, but I'll tell you, I've been through a number of them. I've been through embarrassing things I did as a deputy. I wrecked cars and
Mm-hmm.
showed up to late work and forgot an overtime shift. I've done that stuff. The honest mistakes of like I'm an idiot, right?
Yeah.
And I deserve to get my discipline, but I also deserve to move forward in my career.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another big piece of discipline, right? Discipline is meant to correct behavior.
Yep.
And once the behavior is corrected, people deserve to be able to move forward, assuming it's not an offense that leads to a level of termination. So there's kind of like those extremes. Like I'm kind of extreme in all of this, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm extreme when it comes to transparency on the good things we do. I'm extreme when it comes to transparency on some of the more embarrassing things we do. But also, I'm really extreme on, like, if you commit these crimes and you cross that line, you'll be fired. But if you don't, if it's something that we feel like we can move forward through, then you deserve that chance to move forward and prove that you've learned from your mistakes and that you can go on to have a successful career. And so it's a little bit of everything. And I think it's those things that actually you'll find resonates a lot with the public.
Yeah.
The public does not expect perfection from us, but they do expect accountability.
Yeah, yeah, it's just being fair and being fair to the process. And as you say that, it makes me think of as it was explained to me as a young cop, and I've heard this said many times in many places, but a difference between a mistake of the head and a mistake of the heart, right? Like
Yep,
I can have a
100%.
lapse in judgment, but my values, right? We cannot ignore that. And we need to treat them very differently. Both need to be addressed, and then they need to be addressed in different ways. And sometimes that mistake of the heart, like actual malice, if you want to use that word, like sometimes those are inexcusable. Sometimes there are those missteps, mistakes, poor judgment or poor intent that sorry, like you can't be a cop anymore. We
Yeah.
can't stand for it.
Yep. And I've seen those, and I've had friends who have gotten fired, and I'm like, you know what? Like, it's not even personal. You just
Hmm.
can't be in this profession, right?
Yeah.
This profession just demands more. So we also don't have to look at it as this personal thing. And I actually, ironically enough, I hear this a lot sometimes, and I cringe a little bit when we call them bad guys.
Mm.
There are
Yeah.
bad guys in this world, 100%. But
Yeah.
most of the people we deal with, I think we know aren't. Most of the people that we're dealing with have, like, temporarily abandoned a value, or they've just made a significant mistake, or they're in crisis.
Yeah.
So it's not as, that's what we teach little kids, because they don't have the capacity yet to understand the gray. So we just make it black and white. There's good guys and bad guys. There's cops and robbers. But in the actual world, most of what we do is operating in the gray area. I've taken a lot of good people to jail. Like, I genuinely believe deep down in my heart, that they're good people who have made bad mistakes. It's funny. I feel the same way about them as they go through the court process and everything, right? Like, once they're held accountable and once they come out that other end and they've made steps to address their drinking problem or get mental health treatment or whatever it is that they need to get back on track, like, I want to see them succeed. I want to see that support system rally and people turn their, like, everyone loves a good turnaround story.
Yeah.
I love rooting for the underdog, and I feel the same way about employees who make mistakes. Because that was me at one point. Like, my career was stonewalled because I crashed too many cars, but I was out there working so much overtime, and I was always so tired. But I was still, even throughout that fatigue, I was giving 110% at work. And I wouldn't have crashed any of those cars if I just sat at the station and watched Netflix until the next 911 call came out.
Right. Yeah, we have enough of that through the nation, I'm sure. So I do like what you said about, bad guys versus like bad actions or mistakes, right? And this there are bad people and there are evil people, but very few and far between. We know those level of crimes, those types of victimization. But I'm with you, and I wasn't always right. I was raised very like goody two shoes and like straight laced kind of kid, and then so I
Yep.
did have that duality that I looked at the world in a lot of ways. But I think about early in my career having that outlook that people were bad. It absolutely did not serve me. Like I talked to people in such a way and talked down to people. This very valued judgment. Like who was I to judge anyone? And I remember there was a guy that said, "What are you doing judging me?" And I'm pretty sure in that case I didn't really say anything, but it was probably how I looked at him, right? And I was like, I don't even remember what he said, but it was that common kind of phrase, right? Like only God can judge me, and I was certainly not one to judge him, right? I'm a law enforcement officer and or a peace officer, right? So I'm here to keep the peace and try to protect and promote public safety. That is my role. And as far as like um, just moving society along, like I have one piece of the pie. But I remember pretty early on, a few years later in my career, where there was a kid and I was doing this school visit and kind of talking about police with this, kindergarten class. And the classic beginning of a meeting like this is like, hey, who knows what the police do? And some people said, oh, like they make us safe or they help make us safe. And they're out driving around and they come if we need help. We call 911. And then someone says they take bad guys to jail, and I was kind of like, oh, okay. And then it continues on, and this one kid in the back just raises his hand, and he almost has a smile on his face because he was excited to contribute something. And he
Yeah.
says, "Police took my daddy to jail." And he's not even
100%.
ashamed. And I just had this really cringe moment where we've literally broadcasted police take bad guys to jail. And here he is exclaiming essentially in tow, my dad's a bad guy. And I don't know this kid. I don't know what he was taken to jail for. It might have been the chippiest thing ever. Right. But I remember that was one of the first public times I said, you know, a lot of people make mistakes. I make mistakes. You guys make mistakes? And then everyone's like, yeah, I make mistakes. I get in trouble. Right. Like, I was like, hey, a lot of times, most of the time, someone just made a mistake. And sometimes jail's kind of like a timeout. And then I remember being in that moment, being a pretty young man with no kids, and just thinking it's not going to help this kid to think his dad's a bad person and that he comes from a bad lineage or what have you, right? Um,
100%.
but that was like the first time I kind of like grappled with that and thought about conscientiously, like, how do I want to continue or dispute this narrative that a lot of us put out so plainly for the reasons you said?
100%. And it's ironic. That's exactly where my first experience with that duality was as well.
Mm,
I spend a lot of time reading to kids now, and I do a lot of Q&A.
mm,
And the first time I did it as the sheriff, same exact thing happened, right? Like, oh, we take bad guys to jail. Yeah, yeah, we take bad guys to jail, and that's what the handcuffs are for. And then some kid in the back is like, yeah, my mom and dad both went to jail. And I'm
yeah.
just like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now every kid in class is like, oh, like Jamie's mom and dad are both bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, who even knows what they went to jail for, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
who knows? Who knows what the circumstances are? And so again, that's where I really started challenging a lot of my duality of like good, bad. And I've had those conversations with myself before. I've never really been like so black and white, but it definitely expanded my gray area even further. Of like, and who knows? Maybe Jamie's dad is a bad guy, right? Maybe Jamie's dad
Maybe.
sexually assaulted, someone, whatever happened. Maybe they are a really bad person. But just generally speaking, it's kind of like once you get in the job, you recognize it's not that simple.
Yeah, yeah. And what I hear, and I know that some people push back on that, and it's for everyone to kind of conceptualize on their own, but in general, I'll share from my experience. I've had my cynical years, and luckily for me, they were earlier on, and luckily for me, I had people to snap me and call me out and call me up out of that. But as far as that like nihilistic thinking, quoting Nietzsche a lot and just being like, yeah, like this is gloom and doom and everyone's an a-hole. Really, I was the one becoming an a-hole. Everyone else is kind of staying the same, and I was just exposed to a disproportionate volume of it at a very younger impressionable age. But it didn't serve me to look at the world like that. When I look at the world as I do now, where I try to be positive, and yeah, sometimes it's pervasive to fight against that negativity and that toxic attitude, but when I try to be positive, things are just better. Things are just more uh, everything's just moving upward and forward, and you can focus on the work that needs to be done rather than dwelling and slip sliding into basically a victim mentality a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean it's a cycle that eats itself, right? I mean, once you fall into that, it's hard to. And to be quite fair, I was there too, right before I ran for office. Like,
Mm,
granted, mine I was able to turn into a different kind of fuel, right? I think
yeah.
that's the tricky part. My scenario is a little unique because if you're in a position, which I wasn't in a great position, but I was still in a position to turn my cynicism into positive action, right? I'm going to run for sheriff. I'll run for office. I'll just take this job and then run with it. But most people don't end up in that scenario, right? A lot of people work for city agencies. The reality is like very few people are going to be like, I'm going to make a run for chief, right?
Yeah.
As an officer. So you really don't have that like outlet that a sheriff's office has. It's a little bit unique. So in the city environment, and for anyone who's not going to come run for office, for political office, you really have to be careful, right? And I have this conversation with a lot of people. At some point in time, you've got to ground yourself
Hmm.
because you can do one of two things. You can play the game, learn how it's played, and play it, or you can be the really funny, snippy guy like I was. I'm sure everyone can tell I got a little
Hmm.
sarcasm.
Yeah.
That's how I was as a deputy too, right? Like I had a healthy dose of sarcasm with leadership because I'm like, you guys are missing the mark again, right? And I was always just like, why would you guys just like listen to us just once? Just take our advice on just one thing. It's like you're so afraid to go outside these lines just a little bit,
Hmm.
and it's really a thing where you've got to find people around you that can ground you and bring you back into the fold a little bit because before you know it, at first everyone's gonna nod and yeah, it's funny, and after a while you'll recognize you're by yourself, you're on an island, you're on an island that other people are eventually going to start swimming away from because they're like, man, it's just a constant thundercloud and rain over there. And eventually you'll find that you're by yourself.
Hmm.
And that's not a good place for anyone who actually wants to have a healthy career.
Yeah, yeah. There's that, or there's the chunk of people that gravitate to each other, and they're almost pulling each other down rather than lifting each other up. In the converse, right? And I like how you put that. Right? You essentially, what I hear is that you took ownership of what you could, and that's like your humor, right? You found constructive ways to have this kind of discourse, and for other people, it's grounding in something else. It might be this project at work, right? Focus on your locus of control. It might be, hey, I can't control the department or the direction this whole community is going, but what I can do is focus on my team, my crew, right, my squad mates. I can try to bring this positivity, this constructive thing. I can't control what's happening in the city next door or the other shift, whatever, right? Like just focus in smaller, right? Or focus on family, focus on your health. Like there is something you can control.
One of the things that helped me a lot was the little Venn diagram thing, the area of concern and area of control.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your only that's your only slice, right?
Yeah,
there are millions of things to be concerned about, all the way up to
yeah,
like world hunger and peace, right? And then
yeah,
there's things that you can actually control, and then that actually eliminates probably 99% of those things. And it's that 1% that you've got to be able to accept. And if you can't, then you've got to position yourself into an area where you do have control. And for some people, they're like politics. I'm going to get involved in politics, but for most people, I find that they're getting really worked up over things that they'll never have control over.
mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to the simple things like voting, they're not even engaging in that, right? And
Yeah,
so I'm like, you've got a big strong opinion, but unless you're going to run for public office, then you need to activate, right? You need to go find other ways to get involved, like get involved in the community. Go doorbell for a candidate that you really believe in, who you think is going to exemplify your values in office. Like those are some of the areas where I think, and then when you narrow it down to a policing agency, right? Like as a patrol deputy, how many things do you actually have control over? There's not many actually. And then there's all the things you're concerned about, that you have no control over. So really finding a way to accept what you can control and be at peace with what you can't. And then quite frankly, doing what you can control really well. Ironically, the way to gain more control over the things that you can't is to do the stuff you can better.
mm-hmm.
And the better you get at that, the more control you get, right? Concerned about the SWAT team? Well, if you can control what you can, which is your training, your attitude, your work ethic, you might end up on the SWAT team. And then you might end up
Right.
as the SWAT commander. And then you might be addressing all of the concerns that you had at one point in time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We all have this personal agency. And I like, kind of nodding back to Jocko and extreme ownership. Years ago, I did the deep dive in extreme ownership. I was an avid consumer of his podcast, and it became, you know, I think that this happens to a lot of people because I remember a caller or a Q&A, like Echo Charles was reading, and it was kind of giving this play by play at work. And a lot of times it's this corporate setting, but it's saying, yeah, my boss is doing this, and management's doing that, and all these things are out of whack, and I'm trying to take ownership, and it becomes that for a lot of high drive folks that want to embrace that, it becomes too much, right? The lens is way too wide, and they're trying to capture all this under the veil of ownership. However, I love how Jocko kind of broke it down to be like, okay, yeah, I'm into extreme ownership, but you can't project ownership onto like every single thing. You got to control you and what you can like responsibly control. And I needed that lesson at one point because it was starting to spiral out where I was just trying to take on more and more, and it's not all yours to do. And truly, that's a surrender of ego. Like I have had to recognize that, and I have to continue to recognize that too. It is great to take on more challenge and put yourself through adversity and try to overcome it, but at a certain point, like you have to have that release as well. Like you can't do it all, or else, I mean, you to think you can is an ego issue, and I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is I was there as a deputy at one point in time where I was like getting so concerned about staffing, right?
Yeah,
I don't have to do with staffing on the road, right? Like that, those decisions are made way above me. But I'm watching all of my really good friends and competent deputies leave for other agencies, and all I'm seeing is the mandatory overtime. And now my
yeah,
anxiety is getting higher. Like I love working overtime, but I like it better when it's on my terms. I think
Yeah.
everybody that
No,
like
that resonates with a
I don't
lot
want
of
to get
people, I'm
held
sure.
over every Friday night kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
I felt that kind of anxiety, and I started to feel this ownership, right, of a problem that I didn't create and that I'm not contributing to. And it was the same thing with, our image of our sheriff's office was starting to deteriorate pretty quickly. And I was feeling this ownership in all these things. And, you have to be able to scale back and say, like, listen, I'm responsible for what I bring to the table every day at work, period. Whatever your role is, that's what you're responsible for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's powerful. So I love this conversation, and what it makes me think about is a quality that increasingly through the years I think is really one that will determine your, I suppose, effectiveness and how proficient of an officer you'll be for longevity, and that's adaptability. And so I want to talk about some traits because you kind of nodded to it earlier as far as like who you bring into the agency, how you retain people, morale. We were talking a little bit off recording, but I kind of want to get into those conversations and the progress that you've made in office as far as hitting on those things. I mean, we're just talking about mandatory staffing, and I've been following along. I see a lot of folks getting hired, and know some people that got hired, and so yeah, I kind of want to take the conversation that way.
Yeah, we're in a really interesting experiment here in Thurston County. So, there's a lot of conversations always in police work about pay. Thurston County has traditionally been one of the lower paying agencies. And, getting into this role, you learn a lot more about the reasoning behind it. And sometimes
Sure.
it's valid, sometimes it's, seems like an excuse. But, one of the things that is a little bit different about Thurston is that we're really big and really rural. We are
Hmm.
far more rural than most of our counterparts, it feels like. I'll give you a good example. So Pierce County, largest sheriff's office in the state. They're our neighbors, and so
Hmm.
we have about half our county is in unincorporated county, 150,000 out of 300,000. But in unincorporated county, there is almost zero business. It's almost all residential, almost
Yeah.
entirely residential. So that's where we get our revenue from, is residential property tax. But when you talk to economists, like, that's not really the way that you get extreme growth, right? Extreme growth usually comes from business. They're the ones who you end up getting a lot of sales tax and different forms of revenue from. And cities have unique taxes they can impose. So sheriff's offices, that's the reason they're always seemingly behind in their county comparables, if you will. Um, we're still in that same scenario today. We are still the lowest paid agency in our region. It's not close. And we're in contract negotiations, but what's been really interesting is that I knew that was a weak point for us. Like,
Hmm.
100%. I don't lead with pay. On any of my recruiting pitches, you'll notice that on
Sure.
anything we do, it's never pay. Um, Instead was, I'm like, listen, we're going to be the destination for people who want to fight crime. Like, that's going to be our mentality. That's going to be the character of this agency. It's not going to be pay. It's not going to be, the nicest building in the world or anything. We don't have that. We let deputies be cops. Um, as a deputy, that's all I wanted. I truly, as a deputy, I hardly even paid attention to contract negotiations. Yeah,
Yeah.
the pay, I'll figure out what my pay increase is when the time comes. I wanted to go catch people. That was like what drove me. I want to go enforce the law. I want to do good investigations and catch people who run. Like, that's me, and I've carried that with me as the sheriff. So that's our identity. Period. What's been really interesting about that concept, and again, we just keep pushing out content that shows that this is what we do. This is the sheriff's office brand of policing. Is that we fight crime. And it's really interesting to watch people take massive pay cuts to come work here. I mean, massive pay cuts.
Yeah.
The largest one I know of right now is $47,000 a year in a pay cut to come work at the sheriff's office. And the recruiting is important, but the retention is also important.
Hmm.
And the only way that we've really fixed those both the recruiting and retention issues is, like, we just keep showing up. We just keep asking, like, what else can we do? And we survey our employees quite a bit. But a big one is, like, hey, like, I went to our graveyard briefing the other night, and I'm like, are there any specialties out there that you guys want that we don't have? People give suggestions, whatnot, right? Hey, we're interested in bomb squad. I'm like, perfect. We'll put it on our to-do list of seeing if we can get a couple TFOs for the State Patrol bomb squad. So really inquiring, because to me, if you're an agency that isn't the highest paying agency in the state, and I'll argue that a lot of those ones are struggling for their own reasons too,
Sure.
if the pay isn't where you think you can lead with that, like, hey, listen, like you can send your kid to college and buy 2 houses, then really it's opportunity. That's the next best thing in law enforcement, I think. In my opinion, it's the best thing in law enforcement, but for some people, I recognize it's the second best thing, is the opportunity. And so that's what we focused on. We have grown all of our specialty assignments. Canine has grown. We're up to 5 canine handlers now, plus 1 in the jail. Our metro team is doubling. We're creating a special enforcement team. Our SWAT team is increasing by 3 this year. Like, we've just basically been figuring out where the needs are, because my whole concept with this was, what if we put the ball back in the deputies' courts and let them put their fingerprints all over this Super Bowl trophy and see if they stay?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's kind of working.
I like so much of what you said, and especially coming out of hiring and recruiting, that focus on brand is something that I've put out, whether it's Police One article and talking internally with my own team and bosses as I try to chart out and help organize some of our ideas, because people might think like, man, that sounds like marketing. Yeah, you're right. Because
It is.
you're selling a lifestyle, you're selling a culture, you're selling a way of life. Like, you're going to spend more time with these folks doing this work than with your own families, than doing your own, hanging out with your buddies, anything like that. And people
Yep.
do see this work like a service, like a calling. And so I think it's very wise to circle around this notion of brand, because it's what you are projecting out that you're about. And as I hear from you, it's what you're circling back internally and reminding people and asking people what you're about, right? What do you guys need from me? How can we improve? What can we build out? And you're including people in that process, which is stellar leadership. Um, the next piece on pay. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about like some of the highest paid agencies, and a lot of folks, like, you talk to them, they're super dejected and they won't leave because of those golden handcuffs. But at best case scenario for this recruiting retention issue is they're not leaving because they feel like they can't. And what kind of worker do you think that is, right? Um, how is their spirit? How are they affecting their peers? What are they bringing to the table, and how are they putting that out in the community? And it's not the best. And I'm not at all, so like, let's make the separation. I'm not at all disparaging people that don't love where they work, but the pay is good. I'm not saying you're not showing up for the people out there, but I'm saying, how much better would it be if you felt like you were invested in, you were a valued member of the team, you liked what you're doing, you liked how you were doing it. How much better would that be for the person whose case you're working, or who calls 911, you respond, or your family at the end of the day? Do you have that smile on your face? Because I can think of a lot of years, a lot of assignments where I got home, I was beat down, tired,
Yeah.
extra long days, but I loved doing the policing work with some people, some of my closest buddies, probably that I'll ever have, doing this type of work. And it wasn't about the pay at all. Like, we would hold over, work overtime. I could not tell you where the money went. It went in my bank account. Like, I wasn't spending it as a young single man. I would just love doing it.
Yep. 100%. And I think too, like you talk about, this is marketing. Make no mistake, we are in a marketing era where law
Hmm.
enforcement really has to sell itself. But for me, like, I didn't want to go too far and like reinvent the wheel. Why don't we just sell what we are, right? We're crime
Yeah.
fighters. We're passionate. We take care of our community, and we like to show our work, right? Just like school, right? I couldn't just take a test and
Hmm.
write the answers down. I had to show my work. And I think once we, and even you can take this all the way back. Like, when I first got here, we had different fonts, different badges on different things. I'm like, time out.
Mm.
What does the font on the side of our card look like? Like, they give me the font, and I'm like, that's what we put on everything now. That's what's on
Yeah.
our videos. That's what's on our photos. That's what's on our social media. That's what's on the side of our cars. That's now our image. When the video
Yeah.
loads up and you see that logo, you know someone's about to go to jail for a serious crime, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
that's the kind of marketing that you really have to get to, and it can be whatever you want. Like, there are agencies that we know, like, you're not going to go out and chase cars all night long. Seattle PD is not going to go out and chase cars all night long. Their population is too dense. There's too much
Hmm.
risk. There's rarely enough reward for that. But then they've got to create a different brand, right? What
Yeah.
kind of person are we attracting to the agency? And what is the brand that we're going to show off? It's got to be cohesive across the board. And I'm not saying Seattle's bad at it. I think they have their own brand, and I think they're working hard to rebuild that. One of the coolest things I saw Seattle doing is that their recruits, before they go to the academy, have like a couple week immersion, like cultural immersion class,
Yeah.
where they go around and do community service in different cultures. That's not something that's really going to work here in Thurston, because most of those cultures for us would occur in the cities where we're not responsible for the jurisdictions.
Sure.
But I've been trying to think of like different ways we could incorporate that. And I think that's super cool. I thought that their cultural immersion pre-training for the academy was like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So each agency has something that's unique that they do really well. You just have to put that on your billboard everywhere you go.
Yeah.
That has to be you guys. And once you find that, you'll find that like you're going to attract the recruits that you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked offline with a ton of people that reached out like, hey, like, what did you guys do for recruiting? I'm like, I'll happy to share it, but what worked for us is not going to work for you because you're not us. And to your
Yep.
point, right, Sheriff? So, yeah, as far as Seattle, like, absolutely. Like, I have a lot of thoughts about how I would approach Seattle's strategy, and I've met with a team back when, but there's such an emphasis on hiring bonuses and laterals, and a lot of active cops like that might not be the market. And I'll just say, like, this is my opinion. I think you go homegrown. Like, there are people that grew up in Seattle and they're tired of seeing what they see, and they're tired of living what they live in, and they can be boots on the ground affecting that. Like, that's what my take would be. And as far as translating community immersion, my department, yeah, we have a very culturally dense or diverse and dense community. And so having a partner that integrates works with a lot of refugee populations, that absolutely makes sense. And then there's
Yep.
also a partnership with um, an organization more focused on families and kids, and so that could be the take on community immersion, right? In a population or an agency more like yours, right? Every agency and neighborhood and community has these outreach programs or nonprofits that just work with underprivileged, underserved kids, something like
Yep.
that, right? And then it just goes back to like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to build empathy, and there are going to be those recruits that I roll a program like that. And that should be your first red flag. They're kind of bad mouthing an idea like, hey, we want you to interact with the people you're going to serve before you're a cop or before you're in full uniform. Like, what's the intent and what are we trying to build? And if you're not with it, like, hopefully they can do some soul searching and try to figure out if this is the right career for them.
So here's another topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but also not everyone is very good at self-reflection. Like, we'll just put that out there. Like, a lot of it
Yeah.
has to do with emotional intelligence, right? The
Hmm.
ability to step away for a second and look at who you are as a person, right? So I'll give you a good example, and this is totally theoretical. This is not a real scenario for us, but let's say that my super hard go-getter graveyard shift cop puts in for school resource officer. I'm going to have questions.
Sure.
I'm going to have questions. And if I'm not questioning that, if I'm just saying, well, he's a hard worker, so I'm going to give him what he wants, I think you're doing a disservice. And I've seen that scenario play out locally.
Hmm.
And the one thing I'll say, and I've heard this, I'm not, for instance, I'm not going to promote because I don't want to go, I don't want to have to get involved in community events or whatever it is. And I'm like, if you work at a good agency, they're going to put you into the positions to succeed where you'll
Yeah.
get to be the kind of leader that you want to be.
Yeah.
My job is to not put anyone in a position where they're going to hate their life and it's not a good fit. Like, we have to be willing to have open and honest conversations with people to say, hey, listen, man, I love that you're interested in being a school resource officer. Can you explain why? Because what I see is someone who wants to go hammer felony warrants every single night and deal with like SWAT call outs and like you want to be the hammer for every bad nail out there, right? That's not the schools. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page that like our goal is to divert kids from the criminal justice system and not treat them all like the nails on the road.
Hmm.
So what's your intent here? And sometimes they may have a good answer. They may say, listen, I'm looking to slow down a little bit. I'm still interested in the SWAT thing, but I actually just want to have a different perspective on law enforcement. I think getting involved with youth is a good way for me to do that. Perfect. Then
Hmm.
move forward as you were. But we've had conversations with people like, hey, that canine's like a lot of work, right? It's not just the cool stuff on TV with a five King County capture. Sometimes it sucks. They're crapping all over the back of your car. You're taking them to the vet. You're feeding them every day. All these different things are going on. You can't go on vacation without getting a kennel. Like, there's all these different pieces, and people are like, oh yeah, maybe I'm this is too early for me, kind of thing, right? So I think the other big piece from leadership is, yes, I think that everything should be merit-based, but we should also be having honest conversations about plugging people into positions of success,
Yes.
and really grooming people, saying, hey, listen, like I stop by all the time on the road, and I'm like, hey, man, I saw you put in for detectives last time, but you didn't get it. Just so you know, we're going to open up 2 more this year, and I think you'd be really good. So
Yeah.
don't get disgruntled. Please put in for that. I think you're an awesome investigator, and like don't take it harshly that so and so got picked over you, because I think that's a career for you that you're going to be good at. I also go around for new stuff we're trying. Like, hey, we're looking at doing a DV investigator. Is that something you'd ever be interested in? Like, here's what I'm kind of thinking, and like trying to really plant those seeds in people that I see
Yeah.
those elements that could grow into something extremely helpful. That's a big piece of this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo all that and just kind of spin off of it a little bit. I mean, these are in line with so many themes that we talk about a lot on the show, which are essentially personnel and organizational development. And what I hear in that is recognizing like how you select. We need to be aware of the skills and traits desired for specific roles. A common one we see in the industry is promotion itself, right? So you're going to corporal or your sergeant. The best cops don't necessarily make the best sergeants, right? Some of those hard chargers, they might not be organized. And it's not to say they can't learn it, but then that's
Yep.
the point. They need to learn it, which means that oftentimes we ought to teach them. So that goes right into a lot of what you said, which is, as I kind of categorize it, like mentorship, right? Leadership development, succession planning. So like I'm very proud that like every sergeant that I work with can say who their go-to is, whether it's in acting or who they're actively kind of, as you said, grooming, like preparing for an eventual sergeant's test, even if it's not in the next couple of years, but they start
Yep.
thinking about these things and setting them up for success. Even as you said, canine, like in my time, like I'm aware of several canine officers that were selected because they're hard chargers, and they may have even worked with the dog quite a bit, like training. But then once they got the lead, like they were not the best fit, and a lot of people stepped out of that role and passed it on. And good on them to realize, hey, like I put in a lot of time and effort, maybe for years, and then they get the dog in the role, and they're like, ooh, this is not me. So how do we
Yep.
build around that? How do we remove the mystique and make sure that we are selecting for the right traits? Case in point, all the things that you put out there.
Yeah, and it's not easy to do, and sometimes you have hard conversations with people. Just like, listen,
Hmm.
man, I'm not gonna lie, like you can put in for this, but I'm concerned that like it's not like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Explain it to me. Explain your reasoning, because I see something different. One of the big things I think that you have to caveat this with is you can't just tell people they suck for the job. I think you
No.
also have to follow up and say, listen, I actually think this new special enforcement team is going to be a better fit for you. I'll give an example, a real life example, because this came up, and I know this guy was a great worker. This was someone who is really more on the patrol side, like wants to do the patrol stuff, and they're like, hey, I'm thinking of putting in for training, like the training spot,
Hmm.
and I'm like, dude, like I'm not saying you couldn't do it and do it well, but I think you're going to be miserable. Like
Mm.
everything I see from you is more along the lines of like this special enforcement team. That's
Mm.
where I see
Yeah.
you going. Or hey, I'm really thinking about going into like the evidence sergeant spot. And I'm like, really? I mean, I understand how you can maybe see this as like a ladder building piece to expand into detectives or whatever, but I'm like, I feel like you're going to be miserable, and I feel like you're going to
Yeah.
hate yourself. I don't want to see you in that position, because then I need you to stay there. If I'm going to invest all this time and energy into you, I need the full 5-year commitment or whatever the rotation is. And having those really honest conversations with people has steered people into the right path, I think.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know what, you're right. Like, I recognize this could be a good leg up for promotion, but at the end of the day, I won't be happy, and then what's it worth? And instead, they're kind of falling into where, objectively, I can see them a lot happier and having a more fulfilling career. And likewise, there's people who are an evidence sergeant who are awesome at it. They are awesome. They are fantastic leaders. And I think that's the other piece too is, and I was one of those people back in the day. I'll fully admit, I considered myself a hard charger. I did, 25 traffic stops a night. I went out looking for felony warrants.
Yeah.
I did
We
investigations.
believe it. Yeah.
I would blow through my DUIs. I'd catch a DUI and I'd be getting the search warrant on the way to the hospital in the car, on the phone with the judge, hands free, and like typing my report in the ER room so that when I got out, I could just go right back to doing traffic stops again. Like that was me. I
Yeah.
wanted to get back on the road. And I kind of looked down on people who didn't do that. I was like, what, like, why are you here? Like, this seems so boring if you're just going to sit at the office all night and do nothing. And now that I'm in this role, I recognize the need for a balanced agency. Because if all we had were a bunch of people like that, there's not enough set positions, there's not enough, and there's not enough traffic units. We need people who are more laid back. Who are like, you know what, I want to deal with SRO stuff, or I'd rather go do sex offender registration, or I'd rather go do any of these other things. Like, you need this balance in this agency where it offsets and people are playing off of each other's skill sets.
100%. I mean, I've said this a lot as a cop and sergeant, and I'll say it now. If all the members of my department or even my unit were like me, we'd be an utter failure. Like, we want to
100%.
expand the range. We want to fill in each other's gaps. Some of my favorite coworkers, they think so differently. Like, I can't even conceptualize how their brains work, but they would probably say the same for me, which makes us a great team.
Yep.
I love the example of having that honest conversation and kind of that critical picking apartness, right? Like, again, it goes in line with mentorship and guidance. And because whether it's the hard charging graveyard officer that's just like the high arrest performer going to schools, yeah, having the conversation and be like, yeah, tell me about this. I'm intrigued. Why is that? And maybe they're like, you know what, sir, I know I can prove my patrolness, my streetness, but I need to flesh out these other skills. I came from coaching as a, pre-cop, and I want to return to that. I love it. I miss it. And I'm feeling really jaded at night. And this will be good for my family life, and I can have weekends off. And like, who's going to shrug at that, right? That in the care for the kids, and versus, the evidence sergeant. Yeah, maybe they have a logistical brain. They just need an unplug, or they can see, they have ideas how they want to build that role into other things. And so I love that conversation rather than just leaving them to just answer for it at the selection process.
The one thing I know, and I take this from my own personal experience, is that if you just tell people they suck, or you just tell people no, they'll leave. Yeah. I mean, anyone who's got any kind of drive in their career, and you just pass over them for sergeant and don't tell them why. You just pass over them for detective. You just keep passing or telling them no. You have got to fall. Like, okay, you told me no. What can I do here? What do you see me doing here? And that would have been helpful for me in my career. Honestly, I'd probably still be a deputy. I probably wouldn't have ran for sheriff, but no one ever guided me into anything. I just got told no a bunch of times, right? Mostly because of my discipline for crashing cars. And no one ever followed up with me to be like, hey, listen, for obvious reasons, we're not going to make you an EVOC instructor, but have you ever thought about SWAT? Like, you seem high speed, you're really into different gear setups, and you're great at the range, and your tactics are sound. Have you ever thought about SWAT? No, I haven't. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll start going to training now that you mention it. Like, people do at some point in time like to hear their administrators say, hey, have you thought about this? Because I think you'd be good at it. That feels good. That feels good that someone is considering you for something.
Yeah.
It does. It feels good no matter how small. Hey, listen, we need someone to organize the batteries in the flashlight closet. And I've noticed that you're a really tidy person. Is that something you think you could do for me? Feel like, oh my gosh, they found a role for me to do something, right? Maybe that one's silly. But the point remains, like, people like to know that their command staff is watching and picking up on what they do good, not just the bad, and then giving them a recommendation of like, dude, you'd be awesome at crisis negotiating. I just watched you talk that person off the ledge with no formal training. Imagine what you would be like if we just got you into a formal role. You'd be one of the best CNTs we have.
Yep. It's guidance, right? It's support, it's investment, and it's all these things that, when someone doesn't get something, we owe it to them as leaders, as bosses. And when they don't get that, the best case scenario is they become apathetic and they don't try, which is really not good. And then another example of that, or another layer of that, is they become resentful, which is even worse, right? So we don't want that, but we can channel that. And even when we were talking about recruiting, that was a common thing where we got a lot of positive feedback from people when we told them in a general way sometimes, because sometimes you can't get in specifics, but we told them, hey, this is why you're not progressing or you're not advancing in the process. And we would try to tell them as best we could from our insight, like, hey, you need more time and distance from this thing. Here's some concrete things you could do to really demonstrate some qualities or improve some different aspects of your your resume or maybe like your personality. Like, it's sad to say, but hey, we need to see some empathy. We need to see maybe some community service and some working with people that aren't like you, to try to
Yeah.
demonstrate some of these concerns that came up, to
So
give them tangible feedback, which is, it's quote unquote conflict, and some people are super, I'll say, afraid of it, but we owe it to them.
I agree. Same concept. When we test, we use public safety testing for our promotional exams. So they do the full assessment center
Hmm.
stuff where sergeants from other agencies come in and do the full day. And we get these lists back, and it's I got to thankfully skip that part of my career, but it looks hard. Like when I see the really squared away guy
Yeah,
who I presume is going to test only scores like an 85, I'm like, whoa, this must be a really challenging test. And it's kind of funny
sure.
because
Yeah.
our agency, I get the list, and as a sheriff, I get a rule of five. I've never skipped over
Hmm.
anyone on the patrol side, and we skipped over
Wow.
one person in the jail, and we gave them the explanation why. We sat down with them and said, "Here's the things you will work on
Hmm.
if you want to promote, and then I will promote you." On the road side, we have promoted everyone in order because my rule for my chiefs is that you can skip someone. We have the rule of five for a reason, but you're going to sit down with them
Hmm.
and explain all the reasons you skipped them over. If it's good enough to skip them, it's good enough
Yeah.
to tell them why. Because what I don't want to have
Yeah,
are
you
people
owe it for sure. Hmm.
in perpetuity spinning their wheels, not knowing what to fix. That's unacceptable.
Yeah, it's a lot to submit yourself to that scrutiny and that process. So, like, you do a lot of disservice by not explaining the why. And I've seen a lot of people, in many agencies, they weren't successful the first time, or they were actually passed. They were given critical feedback, and they took that, and they did great. Right, they got the role. So it says a lot there. Sheriff, I want to be mindful of your time. I'm curious if there's anything that you want to kind of summarize or leave the listeners with, or any key lessons or successes in your time so far as you keep moving forward and encouraging us all to do the same.
Well, by far one of the most rewarding things I've experienced in this role so far is the number of police officers who have reached out to me and said, "You have like revitalized my energy in this career," or the amount of
Mm,
recruits that have run up to me at the academy on graduation day from other agencies have been like, "Listen, like I work for this county or this agency, but the reason I applied was because you've given me like this sense of duty," right? And I think that's a big piece of it. The sheriff's office kind of gets this rep here that all we do is chase cars, but we do a lot more than that. I do a lot more than that. Yeah, that's a piece of it. And obviously, as everybody knows, at the end of the day, we are police officers. Our job is to enforce the law, and part of my job has been to bring back a sense of duty, and a sense of fulfillment when we get to do our jobs right. On the other hand, watching these young guys come up and be like, I'm enamored, and I'm here to get into this line of work because you've encouraged me, has been by far the greatest honor that I've had in this role, because that's really what I set out to do. Like when I first ran, I'm like, policing feels so boring. It's 2022, and I'm like, policing is so boring. It literally feels like I'm watching a flower wither away in front of me. And to see just like this, and I'm not taking all the credit for it, but just to see like this revitalization of the profession, it just feels like we're back a little bit. Like we've gotten a little bit of our sense of duty back within this profession that I felt was dying, at least at my level, at the patrol level. And I will say a big piece of that too is like people are baffled that I'm out working with my deputies on graveyard, day shift, whatever it is. I try to stop in the jail as much as I can just to say hi, whatever it is, get feedback. But one of the things, there's a reason for that, and that's because I'm like 3 generations below most of my colleagues. So patrol was recent for me, but I truly think that if agencies want to address a lot of their recruitment and retention issues, the command staff's got to get lower. They're gonna
mm,
have to get lower. You're not gonna solve the biggest problems in your agency by sitting in the tower. You just aren't. Like they like it when the king comes down and has a real candid conversation. The problem with the way that I'm doing things, and I recognize it, is it's high risk. What I'm doing is extremely high risk. The easiest thing for me to do is say, listen, people kind of like me. I can just ride this out now. I don't have to
yeah.
go work patrol patrol every Friday night. I could literally spend every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, in my home, not even going to community events, or maybe going to some of them here and there to show my face. And maybe I could just ride that out. But the high risk thing is to keep putting a body camera on and keep going after criminals and keep showing up to briefings and continue to put 1,000 miles on my car every 2 days, whatever it is. That's high risk. And I think that for a lot of administrators, they look at that risk as too high. But my big thing is that fortune favors the brave. So at the end of the day, you can risk little and gain little. I'm risking a lot, and we're gaining a lot right now at the sheriff's office. Like I said, we're one of the lowest paying agencies in this state, but recruitment has gone the complete opposite direction for us. I'm out of spots. I have laterals who can't get hired on, who can't get a spot. So we're in the complete different ball game now for us, with some of the lowest pay in the state. So it tells me that my theory would be correct, that with good enough leadership, with an agency that's exciting and looks fulfilling to work for, you can actually achieve a lot of the things that you hope money can, but is failing to achieve throughout our state. So, like I said, man, it's an honor to come on the show here. I love chatting with you, and I'm hoping that police agencies across the state continue to rebound. I hope that recruiting remains high and that young people feel excited to get into this job again, because my biggest concern is looking around at the dismal numbers of recruits back in 2022 and 2023 and thinking, in 30 years, who's going to take my spot? Out of all these young people, like, if no one's interested in this job, if it doesn't look exciting and fun and fulfilling to them, like, who's going to do this work? Because at some point in time, I have to retire. I can't stay here forever. You can't stay here forever. So who's going to take our spots? We really need to be mindful of that.
Yeah. So many powerful things said there. And I think that so much what I hear in that is like, you're very calculated, and people need to recognize what that is and how they need to show up and how they need to process their job at every rank and role, right? And how you're going to influence your team in the ways that need to happen, the work that needs to be done, and the attitude that you want to put out so that you can build that. And I love how you kind of left it with like the next generation. It's really so much of the point of this project is, my time is limited. Your time is limited. That is the point. There's so many people that are already wearing the badge that are going to be way more relevant than you and I, because they're cutting their teeth, they're building their foundation, and they're going to be hopefully led under the right pretenses to really do some amazing things for our agencies and our community and the profession. And I do tend to be pretty intentional about it, but seeing the positives, and I do believe and see, and there's a lot of evidence of it that I see, that we are moving in a very positive direction from recruiting, retention, attitude, morale. And I appreciate that. I think it's a lot of the types of leaders like yourself doing the work and saying and doing what needs to be done.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. I like the direction that we're going, and I think we just have to make sure that what we're doing is sustainable. And for me, I have a long ways to go. I've got 21 years before I can retire. So my vision, short-term things that we all need to get done, but my vision is really casting a long direction of, like, I have a long ways to go in my career. I'm not 55 where I could just retire at any point in time and say, and I'm done with this state. I'm tired of dealing with the problems. Like, I'm very invested in the issues that we're facing across the board, both in our own local agencies and at the state level. So I just think that's where we need to keep our focus, is the long-term goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. And thank you so much for your time and sharing it with me and us, all those folks listening. And I'm excited to keep watching, seeing what you're doing for your agency and for the region. And yeah, be safe out there, Sheriff. I mean, you're doing the real thing. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.